What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Get NIST-y, the podcast that breaks compliance out of the checkbox trap and turns it into a real security advantage. No fluff, no FUD, just practical strategies to make compliance work for your MSP. I'm Jared Kasner, and I'm joined as always by my co-founder of Blacksmith InfoSec and co-host of Get NIST-y, Michael Zabarski.
Hey, everyone.
All right, today we're going to talk about third-party risk management, aka the Spreadsheet strikes back. Our first question today comes from a listener who asks, how do companies actually run supplier and third-party risk assessments? How is there, what can we do to make this process easier, right? I assume that this question is talking about the infamous SIG and SIG Lite, and I couldn't even tell you what SIG stands for anymore, but there are tons of companies out there that are doing third-party risk management by either spreadsheets or even when these, I'll call it automated through a web platform. It's essentially just a web interface on top of a spreadsheet at the end of the day, where it's asking a question and looking for an answer that is trying to do as close to a third-party audit or third-party attestation as you can possibly get without doing the full third-party audit. It is painful for the vendor who receives the questionnaire, and it is painful for the person who has to review the results of that questionnaire. So, Mike, what are some things that you have seen that have you thought were really good? Again, without naming and shaming, maybe some things that you've seen that were,
Yeah.
we'll call them suboptimal for the sake of this conversation.
So I'm going to put you on the spot for a second, Jared, and
Yep.
we'll talk TLAs. What do you think SIG could stand for?
Oh man, it's security something or other.
Standardized
It's a
information gathering.
standard information gathering questionnaire. Is that maybe it?
Standardized information gathering, and there's nothing standardized about it. Anyways, but yes. So yeah, there is a lot to unpack here, and I have seen this done horribly, and I have seen it done badly, and that's about it. Um, Here's the problem. The reality of it is companies send out risk questionnaires with no context of what the vendor is, or right? And so you end up sending a bunch of questions that are not applicable. Most of the questionnaires force you into an issue where questions not applicable, there's no not applicable option. Now you're trying to figure out how do I answer this and also comment on it without getting shut out of the running for this contract. And then at the end of the day, a lot of times when the questionnaires get sent back, no one that understands it looks at it because they've gotten the questionnaire off of some website. They send it to you, you fill it out. No one actually looks at it and decides whether there's any risks. So none of it's great. There are some platforms out there that help you with the motion, and they have pseudo automated the motion where you can send the questionnaire, people can fill it out, it analyzes the risk for you with partial context, right? You can say, hey, this is a critical vendor, and based on the fact it's a critical vendor and how they answered the questions, it'll give you a risk rating. But a critical vendor for you may have access to your systems, and a critical vendor for you may be a bank that doesn't have access to the system, and the way they answer the questions may be different levels of risk. And so it really, you do need to find some sort of sane, balanced path for that. I would rather ask a vendor 20 questions that they can answer, and I get some sort of sane, general, high level, okay, this is what you're doing, versus sending them a 300 question questionnaire and then going through and saying, I have no idea what this is, and going back and forth with them because they don't know what it is and half it's not applicable, etc. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox.
Yeah. No, so I want to actually I'm going to talk about some like real world scenarios here real quickly. So, in my copious free time, I do some advising for startups, and I there's one in particular where I've been helping them fill out some security questionnaires recently because they're going through vendor due diligence with a handful of large prospects on their side. And I've seen some good, bad, and ugly here with the way that these third party risk assessments are asked. And I think the toughest one that I saw was a spreadsheet that we were sent that had honestly a pretty reasonable number of questions. It was like 30 or 40 questions, so it wasn't an obscene number of questions. To Mike's point, though, what made it difficult is the questions were phrased as yes no questions. And the nice thing is the spreadsheet was allowed for typing in NA for those and allowed for comments. But there was a blanket statement that said, where applicable, include evidence. Well, how do I know it's applicable? And so we submitted the questionnaire, and we immediately got back a list of questions for every single answer that we had submitted. Of, hey, can you provide evidence here? You answered no here. Like, it was a very painful process that went back and forth, asking for more evidence. Oh, we haven't had a chance to review this, but we noticed you didn't provide evidence here. Can you just provide evidence? Okay, well, that evidence actually was right. So, like, it was just a really, really painful process. And so, like, that is the ugly side of this, as far as I'm concerned, is the really bad ones. I'll call it good, for lack of a better word. There are some third party risk assessment tools that are out there that are based on the SIG-Lite. So it's the same. And to Mike's point, there's some level of standardization where there's in the SIG-Lite, there's, I think, 50 or so questions that are quasi standardized. If you are following the SIG-Lite, like if you're using this one particular third-party system and following the SIG-Lite, you're going to send the same 50 questions, give or take, to everybody that gets this. And we have been fortunate for this company that I'm advising that 3 of the prospects that they're talking to have all used the same platform, which then remembers, hey, I noticed that you logged in and answered question 1, which is identical for all 3 of these prospects. We're going to just pre-fill that for you. And so from a vendor standpoint, like, that alone made a world of difference to me as I'm going through and filling this out, because my answer wasn't changing from company to company. And so, like, there is a spectrum here for how you do this. Now, if you are using one of these tools, guess who pays for that tool? Well, you're the one who's sending the third-party risk assessments out, so you're the one paying for that tool. So it may not be in your budget to do that. Makes it easier on your vendors if you are, but are you really willing to pay for that? I don't know. Like, that's the kind of thing that you have to think about. What you're really trying to do internally is make it easier on yourselves as you're asking these questions. And so, to Mike's point, making sure you know how you're going to score the responses that come back, and making sure you're clear on that. If somebody answers yes to this, you're going to hold them to it, right? So if you ask the question, do you have MFA enforced everywhere? And they answer yes, because vendors are incentivized to answer yes to everything, right? They want the business. And so, like, they're trying to get the path of least resistance. And if they're answering yes, and it turns out that you don't have MFA enforced everywhere, again, like, that could be opening you up to more risk, because you're incentivizing your vendors to just answer yes. And so designing your system in a way that says, look, it's okay if you answer no, as long as you can explain why or what you're doing about it, right? And so giving them tools to be able to give not just yes, no, but yes, partially, NA, and no, right? Give them a spectrum of answers that are possible, as well as the notes, gives them some flexibility to answer it correctly, and know that what you're getting is as accurate as possible.
Yeah. And then actually look at the answers. Because I've seen people send questionnaires and then never look at the answers, and they're like, cool, they filled this out, we're good to go.
Yep.
Trying to think. The other thing you can do is inherited trust. So if they have an ISO certification, you can look at the certification, right? Make sure there's that it's good. There's no call outs, but you can then say, hey, based on this, we don't need to do a questionnaire. That make your life easier if you can. If they have a SOC 2 and the system you're planning to use is in scope, and they have a reputable auditor, stuff like that, then yes, like, you can say, cool, like, you're good to go, or send them a shorter questionnaire for specific questions that you may have outside of that. Find ways to make your life easier and make their lives easier, because as someone that has sent questionnaires and someone that has been asked to fill out questionnaires, they're the bane of everyone's existence.
Yep. Yeah, and SOC 2 is a really interesting one, right? Because SOC 2 allows you to scope or to define what is in scope and what is out of scope, or rather explicitly what is in scope. And so when you're reading somebody's SOC 2 report, make sure you actually read the SOC 2 report and make sure that the services that you are using from that vendor are in scope, right? I can get a SOC 2 that is scoped down to just my laptop, essentially, and I'm exaggerating here for effect, but like if the scope of the SOC 2 is too narrow and the services that you want to use are not in scope for that, guess what? You're SOL. This is especially true with HIPAA, right? We see this all the time where Microsoft and AWS and like there are big vendors out there that don't have all of Google. These major vendors do not have all of their services in scope that they will sign a BAA for. And so if you need to have a business associates agreement, make sure that the services you're using are in scope for that SOC 2, BAA, ISO, whatever, right? Make sure that those things are in scope. Um, you are almost certainly going to be under NDA if you are looking at a BAA or a SOC 2 or an ISO attestation. So don't just go upload those to ChatGPT to get the answer or have it read it for you because you're probably violating the terms of your NDA by doing that. You need to actually read it yourself. And so, yes, it does require work, right? You're not getting this for free, but you do need to make sure that you are doing like actually reading these things. And there are ways to do that rationally and sanely. So
And that ding sounds like we've finished answering the question.
yeah,
Awesome. Yeah. If you guys have more questions on that, obviously reach out and ask, but hopefully that helps you.
cool.
Uh,
So question two, we have policies, but nobody reads them. How do you get attestations done and track it without manual babysitting? We had this question a couple weeks ago, or something very similar when it comes
yeah.
to training. So let's talk policies here.
Yeah. Get a LMS that tracks sign off that will annoy them. That's the short answer, right? You need some system where you can have your policies in it that will assign those policies for acknowledgement and attestation to the users so the users can acknowledge that they've read them. And that way you've got evidence that they're actually acknowledging them, reading them, etc. Or rather, at least acknowledging them. You can't really have attestations they're actually reading them because people. Uh,
Yeah, so that's kind of let me poke at that a little bit here, right? Because I've seen some people talk about testing their employees on whether they've read security policies. What are your thoughts about testing on policy
yeah,
reading and comprehension?
yeah. So I may have an unpopular opinion, but I feel like I work with people who are adults, and if I give them a policy to acknowledge and they acknowledge they've read it and understand it, then they've read it and understand it. And I am willing to create less friction, but also willing to hold them accountable for when they violate those policies because they have said that they've read them and acknowledged them and understand them. Um, Doing the quizzes and the tests creates more friction and forces them to at least skim through the policy. I've seen it where the questions are next to the policy, and so you're looking at the question, and then you're going to the policy and just skimming for the answers. I've also seen it where the questions are after the policy, and you get the questions, and you're like, "Hey, I don't know this. Let me go back to the policy," and then you go back to the questions. So whether it's side by side or either way, you're going to allow people to go back to the policy to get answers if they don't have it because they need to know what those answers are to get past it.
Yep.
There's no process for, hey, you read the policy, now you're in the quiz, and you failed the quiz, so now what, right? You go back to the policy, you reread the policy. So from my perspective, I prefer to just work with the idea that I work with adults. But also that means holding them responsible and accountable for what they're attesting to.
Yep. Yeah, and so the question specifically is asking about getting attestations done and tracking it without manual babysitting. And so, to Mike's point, like the simple answer here is an LMS. The longer answer, to Mike's point, also is Um, and I agree with Mike. It's maybe unpopular outside of this these four walls, but between the two of us, at least, it's a pretty popular opinion that, and that's quite frankly the only opinions that I care about are mine and Mike's, and my wife sometimes also, I suppose. But um, the reality is, like, I don't want to work with children who need to be handheld through this stuff. At the same time, I also recognize that security policies, are not necessarily written for your average non-security professional. They are often written for auditors, and they are often written for CISOs and security professionals. And so the language in those policies is not always the most approachable for a non-professional. And I don't mean non-professional in the sense of like they're not a professional employee. I mean like not security professional who lives and breathes this stuff on a daily basis. And so I do think it is worthwhile having, at the very least, some sort of description of what the policy is and says and does, and to allow people to understand not just, hey, here's the policy, but what that policy means, and translate that into plain English. Or, and I say English here, I don't care what your language is, whatever your lingua franca of your organization, whether that's English, Spanish, German, Dutch, whatever, like translate it into the right language, so that your employees understand what it is that they're reading and agreeing to. And again, the easier you make it for them to understand what they're signing off on, the more likely they are to do this. We talked about this in the training episode. Don't make it dry and boring, right? Don't take the Ben Stein approach to talking about this stuff. Give them the material in a way that is going to be digestible. You don't need to make it fun. You don't need to be cracking jokes, but at least make it approachable. Short snippets. I think the average executive attention span is 7 seconds. That's all you're getting is like one sentence in an email. Um, that's probably not enough to explain your acceptable use policy, but finding a way to boil your acceptable use policy down into a quick paragraph that they can read that is approachable, and using the lingua franca of your organization is going to go a long way.
Yeah, and don't lose sight of the reasons for the policies because there's a number. A, it's to kind of outline, hey, here's what we're going to do as an organization. B, these are your administrative controls. You're not going to have technical controls for everything, and so they need to be enforceable. You need to have a section in the policy to say, hey, if you're not following this policy, here's what could happen at least. Um, and then the other piece of this is kind of going back to last week's episodes of the training, you need executive buy-in, right? If you have people that are habitually not acknowledging policies, you need to be able to go up the company and say, hey, John Accounting is at it again. He's not acknowledging his policies. He's not doing his training. We need to figure this out, right? And yeah, most companies that are, I'd say, not tiny, so over 10 people, 10 people know, have some way of enforcing policies. Whether that's, hey, we're going to onboard a new user, and so they have to acknowledge our general HR handbook, whatever else, you can leverage that. In our platform, we have a way for users to acknowledge policies. But there's ways for people to do this where you're not having to manually run after people, chase them down, sit with them, etc. Leverage tools that enable you to do that.
Yep. Yeah. And so let me change tack a little bit here, right? Because I know where you stand on this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Where do you stand on the one long written information security policy versus many small policies for point specific things?
Yeah. I prefer many long policies. Many long policies. Perfect.
Many long policies. 100 wisps for everybody. You get a wisp and you get a wisp. I'm going to call you the
all my
wisp.
wisps with call me Ishmael. So, no, I prefer many short policies. Again, people's attention span is not what it is, so having them going in and acknowledging a policy that's specific to data management or access controls is easier than putting them in front of a 40-person WISP and saying, hey, do you get this? It also generally causes people to pause a little more and pay more attention. It also makes it so that if you need to update a policy, you're not having to update the whole thing, and you can update the specific policy, and then people have to re-acknowledge only the specific policy versus, again, having to rescan, reread the whole list.
Yeah, I also like it because it lets me do things like um, if I'm a software company, I can have a software development lifecycle policy that is only applicable to my software team and QA team, but doesn't I don't have to have my customer success team acknowledging, right? So I can do point specific policies for different parts of the organization and have them acknowledge only the things that are relevant to their job and not have force them to acknowledge every policy out there. Right. So it gives me a lot more flexibility in terms of how I'm managing my staff. And again, you want to make this digestible and approachable for people. If I'm forcing my customer service representatives in my call center to acknowledge my software development lifecycle policy and they can't even spell software, like that doesn't do me any good, right? I need them to be doing the things that make sense to them. And likewise, if I have a policy on how to answer the phone and respond to tickets, I don't want my software developers responding to that because they're gonna be like, anyhow,
Are you saying they have no people skills? What are you saying, Jared?
I'm saying I have people skills. I'm a people person, damn it.
um, so yeah, the other piece of this is also, especially during onboarding, blocking access until policies are tested too. I know not all companies do this, but I've seen this work really well where you go into a enter group that gives you access to the HRIS system and the LMS system. That's all you can do until you acknowledge all the policies, and then you get moved out of that group and you get access to the rest of the organization. Um, Not as useful for reattestation, but for your annual one, but at least for the onboarding piece, that works really, really well.
But you're saying we shouldn't just cut off access to somebody 1 year after they've started until they re-acknowledge their policies, Mike?
Exactly.
Yeah. I can't get a hold of my account manager. Oh yeah, they haven't re-acknowledged their policies. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, again, you have to do what makes sense for your organization. But at the end of the day, sometimes you are going to have to be manually babysitting, and that's sort of part of the job. Is the person who owns the risk program for your organization is understanding the levels of risk that you can tolerate and adjusting your approach accordingly.
Yeah. Again, it helps a lot when you, as a security program owner, build relationships within the business. So when you go to the director of accounting and say, "Hey, we're having an issue with John again," it's not a constant negative interaction. It's a, "Hey, I've been helping you through this whole business process to deal with risks for what you need, and now I need something as well, and we have a relationship, and it's not just me badgering you about John because John's awful."
Yep. And
Cool.
I don't think John's awful, by the way.
John is the worst.
Oh man, poor John. John's getting beat up today. All right, Mike. Well, I think we've sufficiently answered that question. Listener, if you want to ask any follow-ups, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to continue the conversation. But in the meantime, Mike, somebody wants to get their own question answered. What do they do?
Yeah, blacksmithinfosec.com/ask. Stop on by, ask a question. Happy to discuss it with you.
Excellent. And for those of you just listening along, make sure to hit that follow button so you get up to date on or stay up to date on all of our podcast episodes as they come out. See you next week.
Isn't it supposed to be smash the like button?
Smash the like button. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Get NIST-y.